advocate for the actual policy reform in the pricing at the federal level to get a stable long-term price that can sustain us. So I'm excited that we're not drowning right now with the better prices, but we have to keep looking at the long term.
Okay, very good. Supply management. How do you all feel about it? Our farmers talked about it. What are your views on it, please?
Yes. So I am a big advocate of managing supply with actual demand. I think you mentioned the Canada system. I don't advocate for an exact replica of the Canada system. We wouldn't get it here anyways. But I think what's important to note about the Canadian system is it actually doesn't cost the government a dime. It's actually managed by boards of farmers that collaborate and are in conversation with the processors on an ongoing basis so that they can actually match the supply with the demand. That's what creates the stable price for them, and that's what we can replicate. We can also look at programs that were already in the U.S. Farm Bill that there was a dairy market access fee that was in the 2012 Farm Bill. So it's not impossible for us to imagine that we could get policies that would allow us to get a stable price. And we would get that price from the market and not have the government have to put money into it. And that's what I'm in favor of. And we must do that because we can't export our way out of this problem and we can't process our way out of the problem.
Okay, very good. Brody, Pete?
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
Just for some background information, I started our dairy farm with my brother and my dad 7 years ago. We milk about 200 cows, 220 cows in southern Sheboygan County. My wife is from British Columbia, Canada. Her uncles are dairy farmers out there. I can tell you that if we had a supply management system in the U.S., I would not be farming today. I would not be where I'm at today. Because when you have to buy quota for one cow for $40,000, and then you buy that cow for $2,000, granted you are getting $27, $28, maybe $30 a hundredweight for your milk, but it is such a capital intensive system to get into that I wouldn't be where I'm at today. That's my sort of precursor. The other side of this system is if you limit the American farmer to, if you sort of necktie him and say, you can produce this much and no more, and figure out how to make your farm sustainable on this amount of income. Well, if your next generation wants to come in, take that income and divide it equally, and you're not allowed to make any more. The whole concept goes against the American way of thinking, I believe. And I'll also say that what other industry or what other business model in the US is that of if there is opportunity to grow, we will grow. If your milk buyer does not want your milk, they will tell you that. They are not obliged to buy your milk. So similar to the last panel, I would say that if there's cooperatives and milk buyers that are already saying, okay, we're full, we're at capacity, we don't want your milk, then so be it, work it out with them. But to have a nationally recognized program that says this much and no more, I think that it could be quite discouraging for young people to get into the industry because of the intensive startup.
Okay, very good. Pete?
And I don't fully agree with this gentleman, but I would echo the comments made by Carrie Mess in the previous panel. Let the marketers, the local marketers, signal the farmers and communicate back and forth as to what's needed. And I'd point to a local example, Henning Cheese in Kiel, Wisconsin. 2 or 3 years ago when milk prices were in the pits, the Henning Cheese folks went to the farmers and said, look, we will sustain your milk prices at higher levels, just don't make any more milk. You limit the milk supply to what you've been producing on each farm, we'll maintain your prices. That relationship has worked very well for all parties, and there are probably a lot of farmers that wish they were shipping to Henning's Cheese, but Henning's only needs 30 producers. But that level of communication, in my opinion, is a strategy which would work in many parts of the country with many buyers.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Pete. Question for Krista, please. What sort of things are Wisconsin Farm Center, what sort of advice are you offering to farmers now? What sort of things are they talking about? How should they think about, future-proofing their farms going forward here?
Sure. So the Wisconsin Farm Center at the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection offers free and confidential financial services to farmers. They also offer mediation and transition planning assistance. So I would encourage anybody who would like to talk with them. They also have counseling vouchers available for people who might need some mental health counseling.
Okay. And just to kind of switch gears a little bit here, in terms of the next 5 years, how difficult will it be for dairy farms milking 100 cows or less to have a family supportive income without someone working off the farm? How do you all feel about that? Krista?
I'd like to chime in on that. I think it's, first of all dairy farmers are independent business owners, and they run their businesses very differently, and they make choices when they run their business. And any person who is getting into a business needs to consider their debt load. They need to consider their financial plan. They need to consider their own personal physical capabilities and desires, and work with professionals to assess what their business plan is and the viability, and making sure they have a transition plan in place and that they're revisiting those financial plans or transition plans very regularly to make sure they've got a viable business.
Okay, very good. Sarah?
So I think people have always had people working off farm. Even if you go back to the 50s, you saw a lot of people going to the Badger Army ammunition plant or down to Oscar Mayer. If you think about, I'm from Columbia County. But I think that wouldn't be the measure I would take for resilience and sustainability. One thing that would be helpful for farmers is healthcare and some sort of universal healthcare that could help us not have to manage that intense load for our family. So a lot of people are working off farm. I work off farm. I bring healthcare back to the farm for my husband and I, and that's a strategy that a lot of people use. So I think without some sort of better healthcare system, we're going to be kind of stuck in that. I really think that people, if they want to transition, we're going to need a transformational agriculture to get diversified, to get into new markets, to get into new production. We're going to need the services that the Farm Center can offer, but we're also going to need business planning and financial planning for people to provide the risk management to take a jump into something different. The 100-cow dairy probably can't survive without really finding some value-added markets or some good supply chains to be in that might give them a higher price. But that may mean to change some asset bases on their farm or take a chance on a new market. And so we need technical assistance, and we need risk management tools that small farms can use. So I'm not just talking about risk management like putting and calling on your price of milk, because small farms can't do that. But I would ask that the Department of Agriculture, that the university, that the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, if they can give big chunks of money out to Foxconn, why can't they give small chunks of money out to farmers to really re-energize their situation and to build up the economic engines that we all represent in our communities as farmers?
Okay, very good. Pete?
I'll echo Sarah in that, in my opinion, economic development starts with making better what you've got. Your core industries, make them better. In fact, just as a real quick throwaway thought, the visionaries such as former Governor Hord, who after the Civil War foresaw the dairy industry as the potential economic lifeblood of Wisconsin, those folks, in my opinion, committed the greatest act of economic development in the history of the United States, which 6 and perhaps 7 generations hence remains viable. That's why we're here, or at least hopefully remains viable. So 5 years up, I think we have to farm smarter. It may be more reliance on winter forage that can be harvested in the spring, green chopped, using more manure per acre than you can put on open ground. Look at alternatives to corn, such as dwarf sorghum. Breed smarter. One of my favorite topics is A2 milk, and all I can say is that 85% of the Chinese are, to a degree, intolerant of normal milk, but the A2 milk proteins, most Chinese find them digestible. That's 85% of 1.4 billion people as a potential market. And then just here close to home in cheese country, the kappa casein B trait. There are 3 types of kappa caseins, A, B, and E. Cows that have the kappa casein B trait will yield their milk will yield 8 to 12% more cheese for the same amount of milk. So this is, let's apply science and knowledge and futuristic thinking, and that's going to be some of the dynamics that get people out of their rut.
Okay, very good. Brody?
Yeah, just real quick. So I would agree. The 100-cow farm of 10 years ago will not be here in 10 years. If you're going to do things the same way that you did 10 years ago, you're not going to be sustainable. And that sounds harsh, but I will tell you that if you're not continually improving, and that's not just in dairy farming, that's in any agricultural industry or any industry. If you're not out there every day looking for ways to improve and not sitting back and, well, this is how my dad did it and this is how my grandpa did it, it's not a comfortable conversation, and I'll tell you that we have it at our team meetings all the time. But it is something that if you want your dairy to be around in the future, you need to continue to improve, and there's many things. Embracing technology, doing, like they said here, smart farming, doing things differently, genetics, marketing your genetics. I mean, there's a lot of really small dairies that can take that time and do a really good job on animal genetics and plant genetics, and be able to diversify into many different markets. So I would agree, it's if you're not continually improving, you will not be here.
Okay.
One other thing to add regarding what's going to happen in the future is that we need to make sure that we're maintaining relationships with our existing customers, both domestically and abroad. 95% of the world's customers for dairy products live outside of the United States. And many of you know 90% of the milk from Wisconsin is turned into cheese. 90% of that cheese is marketed outside of Wisconsin. So we need to make sure that we're developing those relationships that we have and exploring new markets for our dairy products.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Krista. One more question here. I mean, your advice for someone just getting into dairy farming, what would it be? Brody?
So when we looked at the opportunity to dairy, I graduated high school. I ran away from the farm. I ran all the way to New Zealand, actually, to get away from farming because I absolutely hated it. And what did I do in New Zealand? I milked cows because that's what I knew how to do, and they have 4 cows to one person in New Zealand. So, but I came back in 2009. We were expecting our oldest child, and I wanted to raise my family on a farm. I knew what it meant to raise a family on a farm, and that's where I wanted to be. And with some heated discussions with my wife, we finally agreed that we were going to try and seek out this farm. So I was a young guy. We got into a 40-year-old facility, and here we are 7 years later. And I'm not saying this to toot my horn, but if you have to be determined, you have to set goals, you have to be smart, you have to be willing to adapt. Adaptability is key. And I think that young people that are coming into the industry are adaptable. They've seen a lot of change in their lives. It's hard to believe that a millennial can run a dairy farm, but it is possible. I'm sitting proof of it some days. But I would absolutely concur with the previous panel as well. We need to continue to encourage young people to get onto farms, to do internships, and business. That was my #1 learning curve when I had to manage employees and manage bank accounts. So absolutely concur with the other panelists as well.
Very good.
Your question on paper, Rick, was about starting farming in 2020.
Yeah.
My advice to young people would be buy calves. Last Friday, the weekly report for the equity sales barns in Wisconsin listed Holstein heifer calves priced at $30 and down. And there's a lot of down. Nobody will ever find female calves or weaned calves cheaper than they will right now. So if a young person wants to build his or her equity through the herd, now's the time to get started. You're just going to have the hay to feed them. But the livestock values are going to lag behind milk prices simply because there's so many bills to pay, and also a lot of farmers are looking at how they're going to get through the winter given their feed supplies and their animals. So if somebody has the opportunity, this is the time to buy young animals right now.
Okay, very good. Sarah?
So I think Wisconsin, we have great opportunity here, and I would actually encourage people to work to build and rebuild the local and regional markets. We are sitting in the middle of the Minneapolis-Chicago food shed. We still produce a lot of things. We have a really good story to tell. We have a lot of farms out there. People want to know where their food is coming from. It doesn't mean that we're not going to export. Of course, we're still going to be in the export markets, but I don't think that it's Wisconsin's competitive advantage to be in the export markets to the extent that we are. And we've seen how fickle and volatile they are, even without someone tweeting trade wars in the morning every day. So I would really work as the state, again with the university, with young farmers. Let's build supply chains that actually support family farms. Let's make sure that when the consumers want to pay a premium, because they want to pay a premium, they want to support farmers. Farmers are still the most trusted people in the United States in all marketing assessments, but let's build that in Wisconsin. We have a great base to build that on, and I think that's the future. Certainly, if people want to be in export markets, great, do that. You will have a future there too. But if we want to have more farms, not fewer farms, we've got to go into these higher value supply chains that we actually can have more control, and that's about rebuilding the relationships between the farmer and the consumer, and that's where the energy is at right now. That's where the optimism is, and that's what I would encourage people to look at.
Okay, very good, thank you. Dave, do we have the cards for questions here? Okay, yeah, please, if you've got cards, quick questions for all of our panelists, we'd love to have them now. So please feel free, if you've got cards, hold them up and we'll collect those. Okay. All right. We have okay. We've got a few more minutes here to go. If you would please, let's talk about the importance of international trade. I mean, in terms of exports, we've come to rely on it in terms of the growth in the milk supply and such, that exports would really kind of almost be a relief valve there, that it does help in terms of when there's a high supply of milk. How do you feel about that going forward? Sarah, I think you said you don't believe we can rely on exports. It's just not something we should look to. How do the rest of you feel about that? Pete or Brody?
Exports are a tough one. You can go back to the Depression of the 30s, which began on the farm in late summer 1920, You can look at the rural depression of the 50s. You can look at the post-Earl Butts' fence row to fence row and show that our agriculture has historically overreacted to short-term global high market price signals. That said, I think we have to be focused on our exports. I recently did an article in my publication on California Milk Advisory Board starting a program of exporting fluid milk to China. 21 days on the ship, RFID chips monitoring the temperatures of the milk in the shipping containers. But shipping milk to China for California is something they spent at least 2 years working on. And there are some novel approaches, and ultimately China's leaders are focused on maintaining societal stability, and part of that stability is food, which comes back to protein. Roughly, a very high percent of their hogs have been killed through the African swine flu or fever, pardon me, get my diseases mixed up here. But the bottom line is China in recent months has been a dramatically heavier importer of dairy proteins and milk fat to offset the declining availability of pork as a source of protein in their diet. So there are general opportunities and there are specific opportunities, but we have to be wise. Currently, given trade relationships and everything else, the United States tends to pick up the crumbs in the global export market.
Okay, very good. Brody?
So I think that, as was quoted here before, 5% of the population lives in the United States. I don't have exact numbers here, but I will tell you that there is no other country in the world that produces food as efficiently and as cheap as the American farmer. And we all know it. There is an opportunity, as in 95% of the world's population outside of our borders. I don't think that you can say export is not for Wisconsin. As was quoted, 90% of our cheese leaves the state. If we didn't have export, and that's not just outside of the state or outside of the country, I mean, it is outside of the country. I think that if we didn't have export, Wisconsin would be way full on milk. We're taking milk in from other states already, but if we weren't able to export our milk, we don't have enough consumers in Wisconsin to drink all of our milk or to eat all of our cheese. We need export, and not just in dairy. We need the new NAFTA 2.0 USMCA deal. We need to get that done. I would encourage all of you to contact your local legislators to continue to try and push this measure through. Canada and Mexico are a no-brainer as far as a trading partner goes. And there's a lot of talk on China because of the billions of people in China. Southeast Asia, $770 million of trade. It was more than China last year. China took about $500 million. So there's a lot of countries outside of the world. As the world continues to develop and people can afford food, the first thing they do is protein. Protein is beef, which all dairy farmers are also beef farmers. Protein is beef, protein is milk. Maybe not fluid milk. Fluid milk is a hard thing to transport. I'm glad they're doing it from California. We obviously can't do it here from Wisconsin, but we can do cheese. We know how to do cheese. We can do cheese. But also, beyond just cheese, Wisconsin is continually upgrading and moving into specialty cheese. So I would agree that if we want to feed the American consumer, let's chase specialty cheese, and we can do the smaller cheese factories. But beyond that, we need to continue to export beyond our borders because we can do it cheaper and more efficiently than any other country in the world.
Okay. Krista?
And Tina talked about this on the first panel, the nutritional value that dairy provides. We know very well here in the United States, and other countries, as they are growing their middle class, are recognizing the value of the nutritional components of dairy products, and that demand will only increase as their income increases.
Okay, very good. Dave, should we turn it over to questions from the audience now? Oh yeah, for both panelists. So we'll leave this side wide open for you all and for our farmer panelists. First question is, where does sustainable farming, organics, and government subsidies fit in? It's kind of a wide open question. Anyone?
So back to kind of what I think Wisconsin's competitive advantages is, you know, we are the home of Organic Valley. It was a strategic decision by a group of farmers to be able to set a set production practice and then sell that to the consumers, and consumers paid a premium. And the important thing that Organic Valley did was make sure that that price got back down to the farmers, because that's the one thing, if the consumers are going to pay a higher price, we have to make sure it actually, the fair share of it gets back down to the farmer. I think with grass-based farming, that's another real opportunity for Wisconsin. We have a lot of farms that are using management intensive rotational grazing and could market products as grass-fed. That's another way to also have the win-win of the ecological systems. It was brought up in the first panel that changing the production systems to more continuous cover, like cover crops, more pasture, that's something that we have to do to prevent soil runoff, nutrient runoff, but it's also something that more and more brands, I'm being contacted at Wisconsin Farmers Union on almost a weekly basis by brands in the market that want to say, what can we do to help farmers? They're concerned about the crisis and the loss of the family farm, but they also know that their consumers want to know what's going on with soil health and water quality, and this is a real opportunity for Wisconsin. So I think Wisconsin niching itself as, let's be in a competition, let's be the most sustainable from a water quality and keeping the nutrients in the soil, and really maximize that opportunity for Wisconsin.
Okay, very good. And that leads in very nicely to the next question. How can we improve our dairy marketing in simple ways to keep up with competing products? Today's consumer is no longer connected to agriculture as it was in the past, and is very open to suggestions on other types of competing products. So how do we improve our marketing to compete with soy milk, almond milk, all the other products that are out there in the marketplace? Pete?
One of my favorite topics of late. The consumer is always right. However, I think, okay, USDA rules for commodity promotion programs, such as the National Dairy Checkoff, prohibit those entities receiving those fundings from doing so-called attack ads or ads critical of other commodities, which also have their own commodity programs. For example, dairy can't say bad things about beef, which would not make any sense anyway. But I think what we need to do in dairy is aggressively get the information on the nutritional content and protein content of some of these competing products, such as plant-based beverages, and then I'll call it fake meat, if you will. But for example, the plant-based beverages in many instances have much less protein per 8-ounce serving than an 8-ounce glass of milk. And those proteins are not necessarily complete proteins. The milk proteins have a complete package of amino acids necessary for health and mental function and body wellness necessary on a daily basis. So I think we need to help the consumers look at some of these alternative products with a critical eye, maybe do some rat feeding tests and see how the baby rats do on oat milk, if you will. And but be aggressive, because dairy has a good story to tell, and the dynamics of something new, big investment opportunities, blah blah blah. That's coming out of our hide to a degree, and I think dairy must be aggressive, meeting these challenges with the nutritional facts.
Okay, very good. We're going to move on to the next question here. What's happening in Washington, D.C. that's affecting farmers now? And are you all thinking about the effects of climate change and changes in the weather? I mean, open up to you all, and then some of our farmer panelists too, if you'd like to address it.
So I think you can't deny what's happening in D.C. would probably be better answered what's not happening in D.C. It's hard to believe anything is happening in D.C. There's definitely a few distractions down there right now, but concerning agriculture, I think top of mind is like I mentioned before, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement that we need to get done. I would say that on the topic of climate change, I think you'll find a lot of farmers that are very aligned with our president, calling it a hoax. I would think that if you look outside today at the weather, if you're a farmer, if you've experienced the fall, the spring, last fall, last spring, there is no doubt in my mind that the climate is changing. Whether or not it is man-made is debatable. What can we do? I think that what we can do is focus on our dairy, on our farms, on our acres that we have control over. There's been many a mention here of cover crops. I think there is so much new and exciting technology concerning dirt and soil and what we don't know about it. I talked before about the discussions that we have with my dad as the previous generation. It was a battle between us to keep the moldboard plow in the shed for the last few years. It's that generational transfer of knowledge and being willing to adapt and try new practices. On our dairy, we're trying cover crops. We did it last year. We did it a lot this year. We went from 100% conventional tillage to, I would say, 97% no-till in 1 year. Talk to me next year, I might be out of business, but we're trying it because if you don't try something new, you won't be here in the next 10 years. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff when it comes to observing what nature has to offer us, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, very good. Next question, a majority of farmers are age 55 plus. How do you see keeping the next generation in farming?
Carrie or Tina, do you guys have anything to add to this? I mean, you're...
Yes, I would like to say we are 55 and plus. I'm not quite there yet, but close. But the opportunities for the younger people, we have to do a better job of getting them on our farms. We have to ensure that our farms live. And I know it's legacy, or whatever you want to call it. We're living under the shadow of my father-in-law, and because he did what he did, we're able to do what we are doing right now. And we are successful. And to make your farm successful, you have to have the ability to show these kids on how to make it work. You have to take advantage of all the opportunities that are through the services, through farm programs, through everything that's available out there. And I said it before, our success is their success. They want us to succeed. We all have to try our hardest to reach out and get every opportunity that we can to make sure that we can continue on. I am so pumped about the future that is going to be there for my daughter. And I really think that the dairy industry is going to be exciting and new with all the technologies that's out there. I don't even think we can imagine. I didn't know about robotic milking until 4 years ago. And hot dog, man, our cows are being milked right now by robots. It's amazing. So the things that are going to be coming down the pipeline, we can't even imagine. So let's not stop it. Let's not limit it. Let's go all out and make sure that everybody has the opportunity to embrace what we enjoy so much.
Thank you, Tina.
I think the future does depend upon that next generation, and that needs to be in a rigorous apprenticeship training program. I participated with the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program. It's the only agricultural apprenticeship program in the United States whereby we were actually facilitating a training program, which actually there is one in New Zealand that actually has a cadet program, an apprenticeship program, and then the farmer mentor. And unless we come to see agriculture as a possibility rather than that there's only going to be fewer of us, then we have to change that structural mindset. We have to create the opportunities. I've told our son, he and his partner, Heather, have returned to our farm for the last 3 years, and I've told them that they can see things, I hope that they can see things from my shoulders that I could not see, just as I believe that I was able to see things from my parents' shoulders that they could not see. So the opportunity, and it's not just an immediate transition. I think there is a mentoring program. We all know about the enthusiasm of youth and can I speak about the stodginess of us elders and how we're stuck? That stuckness, there needs to be a balance, and it becomes a difficult conversation at times, but those difficult conversations are part of that transition that needs to happen.
There's a statistic out there, the average farmer right now is 57 years old. When I graduated from college in 1995, do you know how old the average farmer was then? Anyone? 56, okay? When my father graduated from UW in 1967, do you know how old the average farmer was then? 55. I don't think we have to, there's a lot of numbers we have to worry about, but that average age number of farmers, that's one I'm not worried about, because that one has not changed much in the last 50 years.
Rick, I'd just like to put a plug in for the Farm Center services. We offer transition planning, and every farmer should be thinking about what their transition is. And my own family farm, I grew up on a farm over in Amro, Wisconsin, and when we were looking to expand the farm when my brother was coming in, they wanted to look at quality of life. And like Tina's farm, we put in robotic milkers. We were the first farm in the United States to put in robotic milkers. And one of the reasons we did that was to be able to manage quality of life and be able to have a farming operation that my brother would be able to go watch his son play soccer. And we can do that today because the technology has enabled us to do so, while still being a small family farm without outside labor.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Krista. The next question here is, should dairy work to become more sustainable so that it's not polluting as much and maintain a healthy community, schools, hospitals, family businesses? Anyone like to tackle that one, please, in terms of the environment goes?
Oh, I was going to talk about supporting churches and schools and communities. So Wisconsin produces about 30 billion pounds of milk a year. And if you just do the math on average production per cow and farm size, we could actually produce 30 billion pounds of milk with just 250 farms that had an average herd size of 5,000 cows. Right now we have, I don't know what the number is now, 7,200 with an average of about 160. You know, from a community perspective and an economic engine perspective, we need more farms, not fewer farms. I don't want the scenario where Wisconsin only has 250 dairy farm operations. I don't think that that's a long-term sustainable picture for our economy, for our social life in our communities, and it also has ecological implications by concentrating the risk in fewer operations. We need the distributed production that we have, and we should do everything that we can to maintain that distributed production, because if we don't do something now and take some bold moves to get those people in and make sure that small and medium scale operations can be viable, we are going to end up more like California with fewer and fewer larger and larger farms, and that's not the way that Wisconsin should go.
Okay, very good. Pete?
I would argue that our manure handling systems are still in the frontier stage. Dairy needs to own up to its role in greenhouse gas production and then do something about it. When manure decomposes in an oxygen-free environment, it produces copious amounts of methane. So what's the alternative? In my opinion, composting, you know, turning it over like some home gardeners turn over their compost. But there are 0 greenhouse gases produced in composting systems. And there's also an experimental system called liquid composting, whereby oxygen is filtered down to the bottom of manure storage facilities, percolates up, and there's apparently research from the NRCS showing that greenhouse gas production and odors are virtually eliminated under the liquid composting, if you will. So I say our greatest opportunity to better ourselves as citizens is in manure handling.
Okay, very good. Next question from the audience is, can you talk about labor in dairy industry? Where do your workers come from? How do you retain workers and support them and their families?
I was a dairy farmer. When we started in 2012, it was me and a former employee, and we did all the milking, all the work. Since then, we still have 2 full-time Hispanic, and I'll say Hispanic, but Mexican employees. And I'll tell you that over our course of 7 years in the industry, which is relatively short, my full-time guy has been with us for 5 years, Hispanic. We've rotated through the second shift person, and I've had Americans work. They don't last. They don't want to do it. They want the weekends off, and cows don't take weekends off. I will tell you that our Hispanic employees, I've learned so much from their culture. It puts Americans to shame, actually. They have such a sense of community and family that it really puts us to shame. And I'll just give you a quick example, and I'll leave the other panelists respond here. I have I call him my amigo, my friend, my employee. He comes to me once every other month almost, because his cousin in Mexico has a doctor bill, or his cousin's mother died and they need to send the body back to Mexico, right? If I had a friend come to me and say, hey, I have a $10,000 insurance bill, can I have $1,000? I would say, well, go talk to the bank or go talk to the insurance company. That's not how it works in their community. I'm amazed to see that these people give continually of themselves financially to their family, whether it's a distant cousin, if he's a good person. If he's not a good person, then the money doesn't flow as easy. But I'm often put to shame by their sense of community, and I think that we need to continue to work on reliable, sustainable workforce in this country, because as unemployment is low, even if unemployment was super high, it's just not a job that a lot of people want to do. Despite inviting young people out to our farm, it's long hours, it's hard work, it's every day.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Brody. And this question from the audience: how do you start as a young farmer? Do you marry a rich farmer? Or do you inherit a farm? Or otherwise, how do you go about it?
I'll just put another plug in for the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program. Rick Adamski mentioned it. It was started here in Wisconsin. It's the first federally recognized apprenticeship program in agriculture. But what it really represents as a mechanism is the possibility for a slow equity transfer in some of the ways that it can be set up. And that's the big hurdle. Person could come and work on a farm, but how are they going to get the asset base in place to really own their own farm or have their own operation? So I think looking at innovative ways, that program has spread across the United States. There's programs in Pennsylvania and Maine and many other states. We should be proud as Wisconsin that we're on the forefront of this innovation. The other thing is with the financing, where are our bankers? Are there bankers in the room? Like, where are the bankers who are stepping up to find real ways to provide the financing that a new business person would need? We have FSA loans that can help new beginning farmers, and that's good that the USDA has made those available. They've reduced the way to get into those, but we need more of that. You know, where's the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation in setting up these innovative financing mechanisms to get farmers in? Let's take a chance on beginning farmers. Let's provide some risk management for them so they can get up and running. And we're going to need to have kind of a menu of options for people, because everybody's situation is a little bit different. But especially after 5 years of terrible prices, everyone's balance sheet looks like crap. And so this idea that someone's just going to jump in, we're going to need the bankers, we're going to need farm credit to help us get people in. The Wisconsin has an opportunity to create some innovative programs right now, especially in this crisis time.
Okay, very good. And our next question is from one of our young, one of our young people here, 11-year-old Rowan from Johnson Creek. He has a couple of really good questions here. What can we as the future generation do to help farming in Wisconsin? Is the first one.
Eat cheese.
Okay, okay,
Keep learning.
I second that motion.
okay.
You know, Johnson Creek, I would tell you to go to your classroom and talk about what you heard today. There's such a narrative when you get off the farm, when you get into inner city. You know, everybody knows that if you talk to somebody in Wisconsin, my uncle, my grandpa had a farm. I grew up down the road from a farm. There isn't kids that are 11 years old that can say my uncle, my grandpa anymore. There's a handful of kids. But I'll tell you that when my son's friends come over, we get to tell them that milk does not come from the back of Piggly Wiggly store. So I would encourage a young guy to go and tell your friends, hey, I figured out where cheese actually comes from. I was on a farm. You guys got to check this out. Because if we're not educating our youth, and I understand it's not our youth's problem to teach their peers, but I would encourage a young person to continue to tell that story. If you're passionate about it, I would continue to tell it.
Okay, very good, Brody, thank you. And a question for one of our farmers here. What do you think of the prices of the machines you need? And are solar fields good for farmers? And these questions are also from Rowan. So, farmer, anybody want to address that?
I'll say hi, neighbor. If you're from Crick, you're not too far from us. So there's no doubt that equipment is expensive. Earlier this spring, I guess almost a year ago now, we managed to upgrade one of our tractors. It is now younger than me. So we have one tractor on our farm that is newer. New equipment's expensive and pricey, and some people make the decision to drive a new car. Some people make the decision to drive something used. We're a used car family and a used tractor family. We prefer to do that. It's what works for each farm. That's what I think matters.
The second part was, how do you feel about solar fields?
So one of the things that I've been blessed to be able to do is to do some traveling in Europe to see how they're farming there. And I got to see that in Germany, most of the dairy farms have solar panels on the roofs of their barns. And that's really cool. And I think that's a great idea. What I also learned, though, is that there's a lot of subsidies involved in that alternative energy that makes it worthwhile for the farmers to do that. In Italy, we met farmers that had a manure digester, or what I thought was a manure digester on their farm, and they grow corn, but there was no corn plants in their ration because they're literally growing corn just to put in this digester to create alternative energy. Again, interesting concept, but heavily subsidized to make it work. I think that we need to look at all of our options. I think we need to continue to grow, and going back to that first question that you asked about what can you do to continue to be a part of this as an 11-year-old is when you're at school right now, you're learning how to learn. Don't stop learning how to learn. Don't stop learning. Don't stop having that open mind. Because our next generations are going to have to look at solar. They're going to have to look at digesters, and they're going to have to look at technology that we can't even imagine right now. So to be a part of this in the future is going to take that open mind, that new way of doing things, and the ability to be nimble. So don't stop learning.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, I've got time for just one more question here. So we'll just pull one here from the audience. Let's see if we can find one we haven't covered yet. Okay, you know, I'm actually going through these questions. There's quite a few of them related to supply management. A lot of people are interested in that. If we had a supply management or quota system, how would that system account for expansions to upgrade facilities and the next generation that will be coming in that will make cows be more, to be economical? I guess, and I think you all addressed that, but let's talk about it a little bit again. I mean, how could we make it work?
So I think one thing we could do is all decide that if we're more comfortable talking about managed growth rather than supply management, let's talk about that, because I think the term supply management has a lot of baggage with it because people think about all these different systems that they know. We need a managed growth system in this country that'll work for our situation, and it can absolutely and must absolutely have an on-ramp for people that want to enter the industry and an ability for people who do want to grow. So I don't think anyone, at least I'm not talking about a system that doesn't allow for managed growth. So one way to do that, the Wisconsin Farmers Union had Mark Stevenson and Chuck Nicholson from Cornell, Mark Stevenson from UW-Madison, look at a market access fee that would be a way to disincentivize overproduction, but if you did want to produce more, you pay a market access fee. And by the models that they ran, that is achievable for people. They can produce more if that's the situation that their farm is in. There's also a way to allow for smaller farms to, if they need to expand in smaller increments, to have sort of a discounted market access. So there's a lot of policy instruments that can be used. Also, you mentioned the price of expansion in the Canadian system. We had the Canadian farmers come down to Wisconsin and do a bunch of town halls the year before last, and they talked about the fact that because they're assured a stable price of about $27 a hundredweight, banks will loan money to people to buy the quota, and they figure it has a 10-year return on investment. So I don't think that it's a complete lockout. I mean, yes, it costs money, and the Canadians have said if they had to do it all over again, they would make sure that the quota could not attain value. But it doesn't mean that we can't figure out a policy mechanism that could solve some of these problems.
Okay, very good. One more response. Brody, would you like to answer it also, please?
I'm glad we're on a panel. I'm glad we can all agree to disagree. I'm glad that this is America. I think that I have a few thoughts, but if the cheese and dairy processors, you know, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think that to some extent during this downturn that we've had, the last 5-year downturn, my processor, for example, was not taking on any farms. There are some co-ops, obviously, in this country and in this state that pay a lot less for milk than private cheese processors. So as you can imagine, the doors were ringing and the phones were ringing at the private cheese processors, because if you get $1 a hundredweight over a course of a year, they want to bring your milk. They want to bring their milk to your door. I would tell you that our processor wasn't taking farms. They haven't taken a farm on since 2015. So that is a supply. They are managing what they can process, right? It is mandated by the owners of the private cheese company. I'm completely okay with that. However, to have, we talk about farmers working together. You'll find that if you go out in the countryside, that farmers are some of the most independent thinkers in the world. And to get everybody to come to the same place under one tent and work together, I'm all for it. Let's do it. Not supply management, but let's work on a way that we can, what works for you, what works for me is working for me. However, I don't want to go down the road of where Elizabeth Warren is going today and punish you for being successful. Yeah, you can milk more cows, you can produce more milk, but we're going to charge you for that. Well, then why would I do it? Why would I milk more cows just to give it away? In my mind, it's not the American way that we know. And I don't know that it will be, in Canada, there's a lot of things that are supply managed. There's a lot of things that the government has their finger in. It's a totally different mentality for the American farmer.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think that's about it. We're out of time, but thank you all so very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Rick. Just a reminder, you can read Rick's work at jsonline.com/dairycrisis. There'll be a story tomorrow by Maria Perez dealing with some of the worker supply issues that we've talked about today. I want to thank the panel, Pete, Brody, Sarah, and Krista, along with the previous panel, Rick, Tina, John, and Carrie. Thanks so much for being here and helping us do this event today. And also a reminder, if you want to tour the center, get a wristband at the front counter and have at it. Thanks very much. We appreciate your time today.